Welcome to this lecture on how to paint people who have been dead for at least 240 years. We'll start with this watercolor, which is the first one that I did, trying to recreate the way Odd Nerdrum had worked with watercolors in his 20s. He had described that to me, and I was lucky to be able to work in that crypt together with Watercolor, a colleague of mine, and painting in oil didn't work, so I found out I had to try with watercolor, try to recreate that technique, got some colors, some paper, luckily that Lana paper that I've shown you, and some brushes, and then just started. And I did do a preliminary drawing first, but you see, this as the first one is quite sketch-like. You see this is the chips of wood that they put in there to suck out the humidity, the juices from the bodies, and those are barely indicated here. You see the strokes in the background, how that's indicated, and how I've superimposed colors here and there. One thing I'm really happy with is, and this is based on how Odd Nerdrum apparently worked with watercolor, adding color, taking it away again. He described putting watercolors into the shower, showering them so they would be more worn out, like the late Rembrandt, late Titian technique in watercolor, and then continue working on that. So this is specifically an attempt to recreate that way of working. Now, because of that, this more atmospheric quality, this where it's more contrast and superimposed colors, that comes more forward. You see, I've added a tone here all over first, a little bit redder here. You see this is a bit sketch-like, the arm just stops here, right? Grayer here. Here you have the same type of warm reddish tone in the background. So I did do a preliminary drawing, gently color the different areas in more or less the tone that they should have in terms of temperature and value, and then work into it. So let's go into some details and check that out. You see here, I've been digging these lighter parts, digging forth again. That means that they were darker, and then I've dug forth the paper. In this area, you see it's just thin layers working against each other, and here in the background there was a darker tone, probably something like this, and then I've obviously worked into that, as you can see, indicating the direction of the light and therefore also of shadow. Here's some water that has run, and of course that probably ran over here, and then I painted over it. You see, this is superimposed paint, so you don't have to just push around. You can add paint as well. I've taken away color here, and then afterwards gone in to separate at least these teeth here. And I'm quite pleased with this too, because this was actually lighter on the inside of the coffin, but it does look like he's breathing here, doesn't it? So I took the light up here, dissolved it, and removed color to get the light, and then I've added color afterwards. So that's how you can reinforce shapes. Here too, this is that first color, I believe, that gray tone that you can see here, and probably under here as well. Then I've gone in, and you see I've superimposed color here to get the lighter parts of the crucifix in this case. So you can add color and let it stay. You don't have to resort to gouache to do that, even though that's also obviously a possibility. And this was probably more clear in the contrast, and then I've toned it down here. Here you see that softness here that brings forth the arm, more contrast, more strokes in the light, softening in the shadows. Also, you can see here setting strokes, letting them stay, painting very thickly here actually. You don't see that in the later watercolors that I've been doing, but you see that it separates it stops the arm. Also a lot here. This is almost a little bit like Winslow Homer or early Andrew Wyeth perhaps. But then you see here, this tone here, same tone, gone in with some strokes to separate it, but that little contrast here recedes so that this comes more forward. So you can have a clear line and not a strong contrast, which is really good in watercolor. Here you see I've pulled forth the paper. Also here, this is the paper almost in its pure form. And then in the background, you see that I've indicated the dust and all of this hanging on this inside of the coffin with quite clear strokes. These strokes, I guess, were clearer, and then working over it, they become more hidden, although this is more clear. So this is a more sketch-like, this watercolor, and that, yeah, you don't see that as much in the two other watercolors I'm going to show you. This is a dust hanging on the inside, so you can use obviously the direction of the strokes and letting things stay to indicate things like that. Gone in with the grayer tones on top of that redder tone that I added first. This is an old woman, as you can see. This is a funny story. I went down into the crypt. There's a long crypt with I think like 12 coffins put up on like metal bars so that they will get some air under and not dissolve too quickly. And this is a Catholic church, so they take people down there and do guided tours because they want people to think about the afterlife. So I passed those up a little step and then into a tiny little crypt with like 8 coffins. And at the very end of that one, I'm sitting painting this one. There's a group comes in, they do their tour, go up the stairs, bang, the door closes, and the light shuts off. And luckily I'd been there many enough times to fumble my way out, feel the coffins, and then when I come into the bigger room, I get this idea in my mind that I knock the first coffin over and there's a domino effect of coffins just crashing. Luckily that didn't happen, but because I knew my way around and and the door was also not locked, so I did manage to get out. You see, it's worked much more through. Still the same thing, drawing, coloring in different the areas in different colors before working into it. So grayer tone here, gray, but also a little bit warmer. And then you see the light coming in from the lamp I was working with, superimposed later. So you can, even though it's darker under, you can to a certain degree go lighter by painting thicker. And here's an indication of the dust on the inside of the coffin. You see that it's much more worked with than the previous one we did look at. So let's go into some details. And I'm pretty happy with the hands. I wanted to get the rhythm of the hands first, so therefore I did a drawing. Look at this. I really worked with the tip of the brush, dissolving, and you can go, you don't have to really rub. You can just paint back and forth patiently. Paint with the tip, back and forth. Let it work a little bit, sit a little bit, and then just press the paper on and let it work and suck. And then you can push it a little bit back and forth because you want this line, right? You don't want it to go that way. And then you can get that contrast. Here I took up almost the paper, then added this because the contrast became too little. Dissolving the fingers because the dust here and the dust here makes the forms almost melt together. I also have some contrast here, more here because of the shadow next to it. Soft transition to this, so this lays further back. Very soft transition here, picking up color, adding darker, picking up, adding the background. This was more like this first, and then I reinforced it with this later. And then you see you can work with almost just what is there, picking up the light parts, also showing things around here so that the only difference almost is cooler against warmer. Of course, there's an indication of a line here, but not that much really. And you see how the strokes here can indicate hanging dust. This is also interesting. This is the belly that has sunk down. You see I've superimposed color, but it's further back, even though this is basically thicker because there's more contrast here. And here I really pulled up with the color of the paper. This arm probably went down here, and then I've gone over with this, dug up here with the stroke and pushed the color here and added a sleeve. So this color here might actually have been laying here. Digging up here, going more into the detail. This is almost the white of the paper. And you can see that the transition here is more like warm against cool, cool against warm, especially this stroke here. And here, of course, the background comes against the arm. Look at the nice transition here. This was probably stronger before. I went over, I think, with some Naples yellow at least involved to paint over. Not necessarily dissolve, but just paint over to reduce the contrast. Here again, cool against warm. So this clarity of form here gives solidity to the form at the same time as it's a very, very, very soft transition. Getting more details as we come closer, right? This is the breast of the woman here. Let's check out, yeah, this is next, this is her breast, the arm coming up there. This is the sleeve we just looked at. Very soft transitions here. You can work with that, no problem. Let it stay too loose and then tighten it afterwards. Look at the strokes. That also indicates the substance here, a lot of dust and flimmering, so to speak, visually flimmering. Almost the white of the paper here. Tone it down again with some warmer colors. I did the same thing on the breast here. I can remember it became too light, not exactly like this perhaps, but too light. And then you see a tone in this area that I've toned down that part. So you can go, if you accidentally go too light, you can tone it down again. But you can also, if you want to land on this tone, you can go too light, because you know that when you impose this tone, superimpose that, it will go darker and you will get the more correct color at the same time. I've done it here. Now that's a little bit different point actually. You see the gray tone here, that was probably all over here. Working in that first, then it's too cool. Okay, almost glazing like in one stroke more or less here. Getting the warm tone in there. Here we get to the head, and it was not her, but it was actually another woman there, lying there, where you could see a little tooth in the jaw. That was really amazing. Here's the hood or like cap that she's been wearing that has fallen off. Very soft transitions here, more where the light comes. A lot of pushing around of the color that was already there, and then thinly glazing the colors, the more correct color. First form, then color. Picking up with some light here, and then toning it. You see how I've superimposed lighter colors here, and here also actually. These are these chips of wood that I talked about, and this is the inside, some dust hanging there. You see this area here was much grayer, and the warm color comes in, and that separates the head here from the background. The warm color that comes in here too. This was more or less the first color. Then if that became too cool, I went in with warmer colors because of the warm light that I was working in, and that is superimposed. So this is that woman lying at the very end, together with whom I was trapped in the crypt. Now this is probably the one I'm most pleased with, at least one of the absolutely best ones, I think. Remember going in, you see that first tone here, that was probably here as well, at least on the hands. So in the skin, maybe a little bit different tone in the background, grayer tone here, just fairly flat put on, because then underneath that one loose layer I would see the lines from the pencil, right? And then you use not a dark pencil, not like 4B, 6B or so. You use a very light pencil, so that you don't have to be bothered by the strokes or the lines coming forth. You see here, because the head was further back, actually there's more focus on the hands, so I haven't gone that much into details. Look at the ear. There you can see the lines actually from the pencil. Here too. A little bit here. Here, yeah. A little bit here maybe. This is the hood that he's wearing. Cap. Enforced with a dark stroke here. Been digging here, been digging here, digging here. Going over. Look at the eye. Just indicated the nose too. Could have been more detailed, you could say. Dissolving the line here. So it's not one cut out line. Adding a stroke here more or less in one stroke because of the dust being on top there. The funny thing is, you look at the stripes here. Those are me going over with a broad brush, just with water, and then you get that sandpaper tone or effect, at least on this Lana paper. This, the color here was much more clear. You see one stroke here. I really worked with reducing that. So there's a very little contrast here. Then I've reinforced it later with these strokes here. You see the softness here because this doesn't receive as much light. And then when we move further down, we can check out the hands, and I'm really, really happy with those. You can see also that the gray tone I superimposed first was, I went in with some brown also to get the color connection with the skin, dissolving the shapes here, and then going in also. You see a lot of digging here, digging in all the lighter parts. And this actually, here you see I've been dissolving paint, pushing that to the side, and with the tip of the brush using the paint that was already there to create a line, a very sharp line. There I took out too much, then I went over it to tone it down again. And check out the sleeve here. I really worked that back and forth that way. And with a little indication here and here, you buy that the sleeve is there. And you can reinforce a form with a stroke that is really has a lot of water, and it still becomes a clear shape. And you can follow it like that afterwards. You see here, this area was a little bit too wet. Then I wanted to take away some, or I took away too much. So I went over with a stroke, and you see that the water has run down here, so that this wouldn't be too light. Here I reinforced it with some cool against warm, with some really dark lines. And here this was darker, and then I went over it and really rubbed it with paper to get a smoother, not so covering stroke. Look at this stroke too. That's how you can stop things. And really looking at the contour line and where the line changes direction. This was probably one stroke here, and then I went in afterwards to separate these fingers. So don't look at the lines first, look at what is similar across lines, and then you separate. I love this hand. Here's that sleeve again. You see the softness here. This is color being pushed around. I pushed this warm color more to the edge and then used it to describe softly the ongoings of the anatomy. Here, a darker stroke to separate the thumb. Gone in, and you see I've been digging a lot, and then this contrast here hasn't been enough. Then I've gone in with these strokes. This is probably also pushing color around, and then look at that with the tip of the brush of the color that has been dissolved and pushed around. I can make that line, and you can eat your cake and have it too, because the line here is almost not visible at all. Here I just let it melt together because that's how it visually appeared. Then I go in with these strokes to indicate the folds of the jacket that he's wearing. This is the background, and you see when you work with these layers thinly, you can get that similar type of effect as in the Latition with these layers working together. Look at that stroke here. That goes up here actually and down here. Then I gone this way with the brush and dissolved it, so you get that impression of a lot of layers playing together. This was probably the first tone that I put in there, or something like this, then I go on with the darker and more greener tones afterwards. And here you can see that softness. This is quite dark, but this edge is really soft. The shoulder transition to the shadow. This whole area here, so this is in the shadow, then you get more contrast here when it comes into light again, and covering where it's needed. And I've been working here with more or less just the color that was there. Of course, it was darker, then just showing it around, and then reinforcing later with these darker lines. And you see it very clearly here. Much more rougher here. This is closer to us, so I'm creating a foreground with those rougher strokes. This is more or less the color I went in with first. Here you see I've really worked the whole area, pulling it up. Here too, and then I've gone over with that browner tone, and these strokes that you can see, of course, that this stroke has come after. You see the form is going like that. Then this comes afterwards when this is dry. And this was probably toned with some extra yellow ochre after I've dug this up, right? If you're wondering, this is actually, I took the tape off too quickly and I teared off a area, and then I went in then and retouched it. Look at this, really indicating that shape, going and enforcing it with more water, so I would have a transition from this to this to this. You see? So you can start with something just wet and wet. You can also start with a preliminary drawing first, glazing the different areas in more or less the color they should be, so you get the direction of the temperature and the value, and then you start really working with it, because then you have secured the forms and you can start to become more painterly.